Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and potentially, if everything's working, welcome to the very first Working Out Loud session here on IDT. I'm just you see me looking behind me a little bit. Sorry, I'm just checking the other screen to make sure everywhere is actually going live. But it really does look like everything's worked. My goodness, that's a rarity for us here on this channel. So, hey everyone. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Do let me know in the chat where you are, what you're up to this evening, and why you're choosing to spend your evening here. It's a little bit odd. So these sessions are something a little bit new. The idea is not mine. It's straight up stolen from the ever awesome Joseph Suarez, who actually has an entire YouTube channel that is all about this. It's called eLearning Out Loud, and if you haven't already subscribed, you should head over there and subscribe. He does loads of useful stuff on his channel, and remembers to post videos a little bit more regular than I do. Let's put it that way. When he says he's going to launch a video on Wednesday, there's a video on Wednesday. Unlike me, where yes, that other adapt video is still coming, but it's been delayed until tomorrow. So make sure you go and subscribe to his channel to pay him back for me just straight up nicking his idea. He did say it was okay, but even so. So the idea of these sessions really is just to exactly the thing. Work out loud. Sit here maybe for an hour-ish, get some work done. I'm going to try and keep each session to a specific project, so that there's kind of like a purpose and a reason. This particular session is really cool because it's going to be all about audio editing, really. I've got an awesome project for a DEI piece of e-learning. In fact, the author is in the chat. Hello. From Minneapolis in the US. Thanks for joining. No pressure when the client's literally watching you do the work, eh? But it's a really great piece of e-learning. Just needs some audio editing doing for it. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this session. But I'd really say, as with everything that I do, this is here to be casual. Again, downside of client in the audience, now you get to see how I work, but I'm always drinking on this channel, so tonight I'm enjoying a Ramsbury 506, which is a really nice blonde beer. It's from a local estate near me. They grow everything that goes into their beers right there on the estate, make them there, and then sell them locally. They're fantastic. They do have a website, Ramsbury Estate. You can check them out. They are fantastic. They do beer, gin, vodka, all those kinds of things. It's all adverts and plugs at the start of this session, as you can tell, but that's what I'm drinking during the session. And yeah, I thought we'd do about an hour, go through the audio editing process. I know we're live on YouTube, Twitch, and a couple of other places, so please, wherever you are, get involved in the conversation. It's supposed to be casual, so if you've got something you want to chat about, if you've got questions you want to ask, especially about audio, but anything really, now's a great opportunity. And the last plug will, of course, be for the ID update on Friday, which will start at 8 p.m. UK time, run for an hour and a half-ish. And for the first time ever, it will not be me and Joey hosting the ID update. Joey has got himself a life, apparently, which is very rude. But no, one of his dogs has got an appointment, so he's going to that. And I will have a special mystery guest joining me, which is very exciting. There's going to be a release tomorrow on LinkedIn saying who it is. It was only organised today, but it's going to be a really, really great episode. We're going to be discussing whether or not L&D in the workplace has been effective, is being effective now, and whether or not performance improvement or HPT, HPI is the future of the L&D industry, whether it likes it or not. Plus, of course, all the usual general conversations we have. So do come and join us. So let's take a look at the project. There are two sets of audio in this project for two characters. You can see here we have Mohammed and Waleed's lines. What's really nice about this project is that all the recordings, and for those that have done this before know how nice this is, all the sections of the recordings have been recorded as separate files. That is a lifesaver, because when it's not, that's actually the first thing I tend to do in this process, is chunk it out and split my work into multiple audio files. Realistically, in an hour today, I'm not going to get through everything, but we'll focus on getting some start to finish done. The other thing that I've got, which again is a real help, is the storyboard for this, along with comments around what's been recorded, what needs to be changed, and what's going to be going on screen as well. And whilst I'm not matching this to the animation today, this really gives me the opportunity to think about how I'm editing it, what's the timing like, is the intonation in the right place. So this kind of insight into where the work is going is a massive help when editing audio, even if it might seem overkill. So let's get that out of the way. And load up our first bit of audio. So I haven't listened to any of this, so I'm going in blind, as they say. The editor that I'm using today is Adobe Audition. I know I'm usually a big advocate for sort of free options, such as Audacity, open source, of course. But in my kind of primary professional workflow, I do tend to reach for Audition. It's just easy to work with. It saves me time in terms of my workflow. And as we all know, when it comes to actual client work, time is literally money. If I can do the job quicker, I'm either making more or I can charge less. And that's that for me, really, that's the primary driver towards Audition. My advice is always the same when it comes to choosing platform for audio editing. Use the one that you like the most or that you have. If you've got one, don't buy another one because you think it's going to be inherently better. Unless you're at the pinnacle of the audio editing world, there really is very little difference between any of them. It more than anything comes down to personal preference. So let me load this up. I'm going to be editing all of this in the waveform. I'm not going to be using any multi-track editing for this. There's no need because they're individual clips. What I will do is just get rid of that background music because I can hear it as well, and it's going to get in the way of the edit. So let's stop that for now. Right, so I believe you guys can hear this. Confirm to me if you can't at all.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Waleed said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features.
So, my initial thoughts listening to this is that we're dealing with a good, clean recording. It's not got excessive amounts of reverb on it. There's no immediately noticeable background noise. It doesn't sound like we've got any hiss or pops from the mic or cable, which are far more common than you might expect. This is looking like a pretty good, clean recording. What I am going to do is grab my storyboard, go back to the start. This was some of Mohammed's lines. So let me scroll down to that. There we are. Let's play this again. And what I'm going to do is listen to it through, which is always step one. And I'm just going to initially listen out for any obvious edits, repetition, slipped words, things that just need to be removed, or any potential problems with the source audio.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Waleed said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about misidentifying someone's religion. It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities around the world. The assumption that all Muslims look alike has contributed to the myth that they all think alike. This myth erases the cultural, national, linguistic, political, and social differences between Muslim communities around the world. It also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group. Even the diversity of belief within different Muslim sects is erased. All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association. It's this type of thinking that justifies discriminatory policies and fuels anti-Muslim sentiments.
So I'm not sure if it came across through the strings. It's quite compressed anyway. What we do have around some of these sections towards the end, some of these highest points, is just an ever so slight crackle coming in. And that's just where the microphone peaked during the recording. So it's not too bad. I'm just going to listen to it again and get a better feel for how much of this actually has that in
All
it.
Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists.
Do you see when you got to that all of them bit there? It just had almost like a slight crunchiness to the sound.
If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are
That it crunched the very top of the waveform there. In fact, if we zoom in, we might even be able to see.
Commits an act of violence, then all.
Let's expand that out. No, it doesn't. It's not really harsh enough to show, unfortunately. But it's just got that ever so slight crunchiness to it that just means it peaked on the mic.
Commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists.
Don't think.
If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association. It's this type of thinking that justifies.
So that's probably the most noticeable bit there.
It's this type of thinking that
it kind of goes for a couple of syllables and just gets a little bit fuzzy.
It's this type of thinking that justifies discriminatory policies and fuels anti-Muslim sentiments.
I think overall we got very lucky there, in the sense that it has peaked, but it's not really pushed any further than just kind of tickling the limit, as we often say. The lines on the recorder probably went red, but they probably didn't completely clip and go solid red. And if you don't know what I mean by this, down here at the bottom of your editor, when I'm playing audio, you'll see these green bars appear.
Muslim sex is erased.
And yellow, and then an area of red. And if it solidly hits the end, you'll see these two little boxes on the left and right indicators go solid red, and they'll stay red. And that indicates that we've actually clipped the top of the track. And once you start clipping or peaking on the microphone will capture a distorted sound. Now, you can do some what we call healing in the post-production sort of setting, which is what we'll do. We'll do ever so slight heal on this. This will be easy to get rid of because it's so slight. But really, if you're recording and your microphone is peaking or your recording track clips, the best thing to do is to stop, lower the volume on the microphone. We call it, the mic being too hot. Lower that down a little bit. It's far easier to capture a quiet recording and boost that up in post than it is to try and fix a clipped or peaking recording. Sometimes it's salvageable. This isn't bad at all. But if it really does clip quite harshly and for quite an extended period, there's really very little you can do in post. So let's dive into doing that first of all. So I'm just kind of occasionally glancing an eye over the different chats to make sure I'm not just ignoring anyone, but I don't think I am, which is lovely. So let's do a bit of a heal job here then. This has all moved. I have just realised that I updated Audition last night and stuff has moved. That's fine. Let's do this. I used to have diagnostics. There we go. So this is one of my favorite bits of using Adobe Audition, and it's a real time saver. Is the clipper. There we go. So this will just take a quick scan of anything that has sort of clipped in the audio. This is only very lightly clipped to my ear. So what I'm going to do is just see if the scan here can pick it up. And it seems like, in actual fact, it doesn't even pick it up as clipped. So let's try. No. It's so slight that the automated tools actually can't even pick it up. Well, that's okay. That's absolutely fine. Because what we might find is that as we go through the standard process, this might naturally bring it down enough for it to not be a problem. So let me go to effects. So if you haven't sort of gone to any of the webinars that I've done before about audio editing, I use a really simple ENCN method, which is EQ, normalize, compress, normalize. If you've got a decent starting recording, that's really all you need to do. First step of that is equalize. So I'm going to go down to filter and EQ. In any editor, there are going to be a whole range of EQ options. My personal working preference is to use a parametric equalizer. This is kind of what you might call the classic equalizer, the the curvy line graph with all the different frequencies. And basically, all EQ is the ability to increase or decrease, cut away or introduce different frequencies in the waveform. Let me just knock this back to default to start with. What you will find is that you'll get used to, if you record your own voice a lot or record the same voices a lot, you'll be able to get very used to going, I know exactly what this voice needs when recorded in this environment. It's very easy. These being quite clean recordings, this will be relatively simple. But a couple of things you're always going to want to consider. You're pretty much always going to want to add a high pass filter. This rolls off the bottom end of frequencies. When you record, you're going to capture a vast range of frequencies. A lot of them sit outside of our ability to hear, and certainly well below frequencies that the human voice exists at. Now, we don't really want anything in this recording that isn't the human voice or that we can't actually hear, as those things will just muddy the sound. So what I tend to do is put a high pass filter on and then just roll that up so that we get rid of pretty much everything. And I like to start at about 80. And from there, judge it based on the individual's voice. So this particular voice actor has a fair bit of bass in their voice. Their voice is quite low, quite rich. We don't want to lose that by rolling off too much. My own voice is not particularly kind of full or deep, and so I tend to roll it off to about 110. It really does vary from person to person, and it makes a minute difference, but it adds up in the later steps. So it's important to take our time with this. So I just want to take a little listen with that rolled back to 80.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective.
And then
As
if
Walid
that wasn't
said,
there,
people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about misidentifying someone's religion.
so now imagine if I rolled that way up too high, and let's see what would happen.
It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities around the world.
And you can see as I drag that up, more and more of those lower frequencies are dropped away very harshly. And you can hear if you push it too far, it sounds almost like he's on the distant end of like an old ham radio or something. So let's pull that right back. I'm thinking about 90 sits well.
The assumption that all Muslims look alike has contributed to the myth that they all think alike. This myth erases the cultural, national, linguistic, political, and social differences between Muslim communities around the world. It also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location.
There we go. So I'm happy with that. We've ended up at actually about 69 hertz, so very low compared to my usual settings. But I think that's rolled off a lot of this kind of mess down here. You can see this isn't human voice. This is a bit of what's caught in the reverb, a little bit of room noise, lots of things that really we're not losing anything from the richness of this voice actor's voice, but we are just getting a nice clean sound. So next up, we want to think about where do we want to boost? Typically, depending on the microphone that you record into, you'll try and understand, what does this microphone record well? What does it not record so well? So for instance, I'm using an SM7B when I record with this. I know that I kind of have to go in and do an ever so slight lift of a couple of the mids that can get a bit muddy on this particular microphone. As part of that, I use the presence boost in this, which gives that mid-tone a bit of a kick up as well. But for my personal preference, I still find it to be a little bit low. So I ever so slightly lift the mids. On this occasion, I'm going to assume this was recorded on quite a clear condenser mic. It seems quite flat, which is kind of the telltale sign of that kind of microphone. These are microphones like the Rode NT1, things like that, the kind of classic voice actor microphones, if you will, or the Blue Yetis and things like that. Let me just have another listen here.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective.
Yeah, so although it's now not got anything muddy in the end, it does feel a little bit flat. So what we might want to do is add a low pass filter. Not a low pass filter, sorry. High pass gain. There we go. And just at the top here, start working up a little bit of a curve. Or maybe just get rid of this entirely, to be honest. You maybe just want a little bit of a peak over here.
As Walid said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about misidentifying someone's religion. It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities around the world. The assumption that all Muslims look alike has contributed to the myth that they all think alike.
Okay, so if I turn that off.
This myth erases the cultural, national,
and on
linguistic, political, and social differences between Muslim communities around the world.
And what you can hear there is that's just a little bit crisper in that high end, and it's just kind of making each word, each letter, each mouth sound ever so slightly crisper. This is great if you have a very boxy recording as well, and this can sometimes happen when people are too close to the mic, or they kind of over soundproof the area around them, so there's no natural verb. We don't have that here, but that can leave you with a very flat, almost muffled audio. Very clean, very professional, but there's just not that crispness, that ping, as it's often called. So just these two little boosts here, really just lifting that clarity. It
also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group. Even the diversity of belief within different Muslim sects is erased. All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association.
The one thing it does do is ever so slightly accentuate some of those clips that we spoke about earlier.
All Muslims.
What I am thinking. Oh, no. I am going to apply this. I'm pretty happy with that. But I think we are going to have to make some changes.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Walid said, people decide whether someone.
What we've immediately got here, as you can see, is we've now developed some peaking on the track, or clipping on the track rather. So I'm going to normalize this. So that's the first N of the ENCN, is normalize. This just allows us to get slightly more control over the amplitudes that we're dealing with. So in here it's effects, amplitude and compression, normalize. I always normalize to -1. And it's not made a huge difference, but what we'll see is...
Muhammad, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Walid said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about misidentifying someone's religion.
We've now got a very consistent amplitude across the whole thing. You'll notice the whole waveform has just come together a little bit more. The tops of these peaks are now much closer together than they were. And most importantly, we do not have that clipping on the track.
It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities around the world. The assumption that...
So the other real benefit of using normalize rather than manually adjusting your volume is that it means, for instance, for this project, I've got, I think, 8 or 9 tracks to edit. This way I know that if I normalize all of them to -1 dB, they're all normalized to that volume. So assuming the voice actors don't radically change their volume during recordings, we won't have an issue with tracks being of varying amplitudes in the final sort of e-learning, which can be really off-putting, as we all know. If for some reason they do, you can load them sort of multiple tracks in and match the volume and treat them as one and all these kinds of things. To be honest, I think the value in having them separate far outweighs the ever so slight issue of playing them side by side and just manually adjusting the amplitude, especially given how easy it is. Really, it's just a case of highlight it, grab the little dial that appears there and drag it up or down. It's so easy to do. I think sometimes we can create work. Hey, Kara, thanks for joining us. Sorry if I missed your message for a while there. I was just extolling the virtues of normalization rather than manual manual amplitude setting when editing audio. We are having a very relaxed time, just editing some voiceover. Oh, there we go. It's just come to hurl some abuse my way. That's fine. That's okay. That's it's the middle of the week. It's the right time for that. So let's go on to the next bit then. So now we've normalized this, we've got some control over the amplitude, we've got a decent EQ on there, and that's sounding pretty clear to me. We've got a fairly nice
the individual differences between Muslims
clarity in there. One thing that has crept in though, and you can really hear it at the start, just where we've EQ'd and boosted some of those higher frequencies and then normalized, have a listen to what was silent. So what we've got is a creeping background noise, and that will often creep in when you start changing the frequencies. We've put actually quite a big boost into some of the high ends on this to get that clarity in the wording, but that's created this hiss in the background, or accentuated. It was always there, but it just wasn't particularly loud. But fixing it, luckily, is super easy. Now, you can reopen the EQ, dive into much more detail and try and find the individual frequency of it. But again, this is one of the many reasons why I like to use Audition when doing client work, because instead I can come in here, go to noise reduction and restoration, and just use the denoise tool. Let me pull that over here. The denoise tool basically looks for exactly this: erroneous frequencies that sit outside of the main body of the recording. It identifies them and it gives me an amount by which I can reduce them. As a rule, the more you reduce them by, the more potential noise or distortion it's going to add. And you don't need to always make a noise silent. That's the thing. When you've got other noise on top of it, i.e. the human voice in this case, you don't need the background to be silent, just sufficiently not noticeable. Here you can choose your processing focus. Is it just flat? You want everything in the waveform. Focus on all frequencies, focus on low frequencies, focus on mid, focus on lower and higher frequencies. That's where we want to be, because that's where I sense this is. I think it's going to be higher frequencies listening to that, but let's go higher and lower and just see what it sounds like. I'll leave this at 12%, which I tend to find is a good starting spot. So now,
Hi, I'm Mohammed.
That is still there. So let's knock that up to 30%-ish. That's close enough.
Hi, I'm Mohammed.
And that's pretty much gone. Certainly to the point where I'm comfortable saying it's no longer immediately noticeable. But what I will do is let this play through and just make sure it's not adding any distortion to any other part of the audio.
And I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Walid said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about misidentifying someone's religion. It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities.
And this is interesting because here in red, you can see what it's actually getting rid of. And you can see that actually I was somewhat wrong here. A lot of these are much higher up the frequency list than I would have expected, much lower down, the frequency bandwidth than I'd have expected them to be. So this is that hissing sound that we were hearing. This red at the top here, it's pulling it out of kind of the kind of low to mid range. Then the actual, what we'd really call the mids, is kind of empty, and the highs really nothing at all. So it looks like it is predominantly low, but the key thing is we're getting rid of it.
Communities around the world. The assumption that all Muslims look alike has contributed to the myth that they all think alike. This myth erases the cultural, national, linguistic, political, and social differences between Muslim communities around the world. It also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group. Even the diversity of belief within different Muslim sects is erased.
So it did sound like we had something there that's got worse.
Geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group. Even the diversity of belief.
Yeah, so here this is going the wrong way at this point.
Even the diversity of
Going to narrow it down to here. This is where we had the ever so slight peaking. See you later, Kara. This is where we had the slight peaking before. So I'm just going to play this through.
Even the diversity of belief within different Muslim sects is erased. All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike. They all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association.
So we've got slightly more crackle creeping in there. Now, one option we do have that I don't like to use that often, and you'll see how rarely I use it because I'm going to struggle to find it. Is it amplitude? There we go. Auto heal. Now, this is a very hit and miss tool. So what I'm actually going to do is finish applying this denoise first.
Hi, I'm...
So that's done. And then I'm just going to select this section that has the problems in it.
All Muslims are...
Yeah. And then go effects and auto heal. Now, auto heal has a short duration audio effects, reduced duration of your selected clip to approximately right. Okay, yeah, that again shows you how rarely I use it.
All Muslims.
That's not what I wanted. There we go.
All Muslims are.
So I've selected a short area. And I'm going to go auto heal. Now that's made that a lot quieter, but
all Muslims are...
Oh yeah, no. That's what I mean when I say this is a very hit and miss tool. Sometimes it's an absolute savior. Other times it's entirely useless. So what I will do though, let's see if the standard restore can do anything. No.
All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists.
So what I might be tempted to do is ever so slightly nudge this down manually and just see if that softens it.
All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence...
Hey Luke, how you doing? Thank you for joining us. I know we've got one whole Twitch viewer, but thanks for joining us here on YouTube. Hope you've had a good day.
Violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association. It's this type of thinking that justifies discriminatory policies and fuels anti-Muslim sentiments.
Yeah, so this is always the danger when you've got a couple of sections that are just ever so slightly peaked. The more you kind of go into it, the more this is going to happen. What I might do... I wonder where we've got... No. Hiss reduction.
All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association. It's this type of thinking that justifies discrimination.
What I might do is finish off the ENCN and then see where we end up. So, pardon me, the next step here is actually compression. Now, there are tons of different approaches to compression, but the basic idea is to kind of tighten up the track. Arguably, compression is the difference between a nicely recorded track and a professional sounding track. I think it's the tool that is most commonly used. It's very rare to hear professional audio that has not gone through at least one phase of compression. So, I mean, some, especially in the kind of music world, compression is really used to create a style of vocals. At the extreme end, you've got things like these vocalizers that kind of almost create robotic voices. That's an extreme use of compression, usually combined with other kind of stranger effects like chorus or a flanger or something like that. But compression, I think, is one of the most effective tools when it comes to editing audio and getting an immediately good sound. And I'll show you what I mean. So let me just set this off as playing, and I'm going to add a very basic out-of-the-box piece of compression.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Walid said, people decide whether someone is Muslim or not primarily based on a number of phenotypical features. But it's not just about...
So, I'm going to play a little bit more of this, but you probably already heard the difference. This just straight out of the box. Actually, this is a slightly custom profile. But this really basic multiband compressor, just thrown onto it without any adjustment, and the difference it made. I'll play a bit more, I'll turn it off, and you'll hear the difference again.
Misidentifying someone's religion. It's about the impact that this type of thinking has on Muslim individuals and communities around the world. The assumption that all Muslims look alike has contributed to the myth that they all think alike. This myth erases the cultural...
And the interesting thing here is that a lot of what this is doing is not actually adding. it's taking away. You can see here, if we play, all the red that you're seeing on these bars is where it's clipping away pieces of audio.
National, linguistic, political, and social differences between Muslim.
It's pulling out high frequencies, it's pulling out mid frequencies. It's not very often pulling out low frequencies because we rolled most of those off entirely. Now, what a multiband compressor is, rather than being one compressor, you can see here we've actually got 4 separate compressors, all operating in slightly different ways. This allows you to have different levels and amounts and types of compression on the different frequencies, like we saw in the equalization stage earlier on. This is my personal preference for compression. I think you get a better result by sort of using that granular control. If, however, you just want to apply compression to the track, you can just go straight to, in most tools, it'll just be the compressor. In the Audition world, it is the Dynamics compression tool, where you have a compressor, a noise gate, and a limiter all combined into one, and you can just turn the other 2 off if you just literally want compression. But the basic idea of compression is that you have a threshold, and once it crosses that in terms of amplitude or volume, the compressor will activate. You have gain, so does it make it louder? Does it make it quieter? To what ratio does it? So 3:1, for instance, so 3 parts of the original to 1 part compressed, that kind of thing. The attack is how quickly the compressor switches on. So literally how quickly it attacks the sound. These are all set to 1 millisecond, so they are very quick to respond. And the release is once the compressor is turned on, once the audio falls back below the threshold, how long does it take for the compressor to turn back off? These are all set to a default of 100 milliseconds, which you got to think is still it's a second. That's still a fairly rapid release. You could go a lot quicker. You could set that to 1 millisecond, but that would be a very jarring up and down experience when you think potentially 50 times in a second you could compress and uncompress as a voice moves up and down. And the danger is there. You'll need to be very careful in setting your threshold so it's not constantly triggering. These pretty much all follow the same attack, or they all have exactly the same attack and release settings. The extreme ends here have ratios of 3:1. The middle 2 have 2:1. 2:1 is as low as you can go with compression. 1:1 is nothing happening. 2:1 is a nice subtle change, thus the mids are covered by that. 3:1 is a slightly more noticeable increase in volume for those. Thus we put them on the high and the low, which inherently are less of the sound anyway. That's what gives you a lot more of the presence. And then we've got the gain. Really, we're boosting a lot of the highs again here. You can see we're boosting some of the lows, but we're not boosting back the mids. So that means that when these areas are compressed, we're then increasing the volume of that compressed sound to make sure the track doesn't just globally get quieter. Overall, though, when we push out the audio from this, we're actually dropping it. We've got it set to -2. We are making it overall. We're reducing the amplitude. We are squashing it down. I've also activated a brick wall limiter, which just means you can never come out of this with any peaks going on. Let's apply that. Now you can see that is probably the most substantial change we've made to the waveform. The waveform has become much more full, much blockier.
Communities around the world. It also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group.
And that's why after this stage, I go back to the N again, which is still normalized on both occasions, go amplitude compression, normalize process, still leave it at -1, apply, it just shrinks it back down for me.
Even the diversity of belief within different Muslim sects is erased. All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith. They all look alike, they all think alike. If one of them commits an act of violence, then all of them are terrorists. If one of them is guilty of a crime, then all of them are guilty by association. It's this type of thinking that justifies discriminatory policy.
Now, this peaking at this end is getting a little bit beyond what I am happy with, if I'm honest. I might slightly reduce this a tad, but I'm not sure it's now going to be the right way to go. Glad you're having a nice dinner there then, Luke. Nice cheeky midweek takeaway Chinese. Very nice indeed. Just going to drag that down a little bit more, bring it in line with what's going on around it.
It's this type of thinking that justifies discriminatory policies and fuels anti-Muslim sentiments.
So that did a lot to pull that back there. Sometimes that is the best way to deal with it, is to just go in and manually adjust the amplitude. It can be tricky, and it's not always going to be the fix. And you can see that over here.
It also erases the individual differences between Muslims who live in the same geographic location or who belong to the same sectarian group.
Nothing so far.
Even the diversity.
You can hear that in diversity. It's got a real fuzziness to it. The tricky thing is, of course, that because we're not dealing with an actual full clip, it's going to be very difficult.
Even the diversity.
I always find this interesting when you have to get into this level of editing. Really look at a waveform. It's fascinating. But it is very difficult to get to the bit you actually want.
The diversity.
So I'm going to say it introduces somewhere around here. Yep. I'm just going to knock that down. This is going to be, that may even be too much.
Diversity of.
That's just taken the edge off the crispiness there. Now, that level of zooming in and editing is not fun.
Belief within different Muslim sects is erased. All Muslims are lumped into one homogeneous monolith.
Lovely. So yeah, after all that, just a little bit of effectively making it quieter has just done enough to take that crispiness, that crunchiness off the audio. So that really is ENCN editing. At its core, the only thing that was any different that we did here was we used the denoise tool when we kind of inadvertently introduced some noise to the background when we boosted those high frequencies. We have some of it creeping back in.
Hi, I'm Mohammed.
That compression,
and I'll help you look at the party scenario from a different perspective. As Walid said,
but it is actually just in that very first start. So what I'll do is just delete that.
Hi, I'm Mohammed.
Yeah. So that's no issue
Muslim
at all.
Sentiments.
And there's none at the end. So I think we are then good. So a couple of other considerations then. In the original request for these files, let me go back to that. They requested in in the wave format. So I'm guessing these are most likely going back into an Adobe product, I would assume. Yeah, so they're going to be going in via dynamic link to After Effects, which makes perfect sense for the remainder of the editing process. So what we'll do is we'll go File, and we will export these. We'll go File. We will go get to know what we'll export it directly as a file. and this was a Mohammed track 01. So we'll call it M01. Wave is going to be the default in almost every editing suite. What I will do is leave that at 16-bit, I think, because that will match the original file by the looks of it. Wave A and B, and I'm going to save that just in live stream audio. I'm just going to create a new file for exports and save it in there. Hit the OK button, and this will save it out. The one thing I always like to do as well is save the actual work that I've done. Save as, there he is. They have changed this. So where now do I get to save my project? Oh, it's going to have saved it in the original. Okay, ignore me. It will have saved it in the original project folder. As you can tell, it's been a while since I've logged into Audition and done this. This is not the norm. This update has moved a few things around, but that's fine. So the key thing to remember, really, whenever editing audio, listen through. Really take your time to get to grips with it. Read through the requirements. Identify the easy stuff, and then start with your basics. Equalize, normalize, compress, normalize. Keep it simple. Only do something else if it's needed. For instance, once we equalized, normalized, we found we had some noise, so we introduced noise reduction. We got a little bit of noise at the start and the end there, so I just trimmed it off. We found we had some crunchiness being introduced to some of the clipping lines, so I went in and manually reduced the waveform amplitude. You don't introduce that stuff unless you need to. Audio editing is always best when done simply, to put it mildly. Well, we are pretty close to the full hour, actually. So I think probably it's not going to be viable to do another file on the live stream tonight. I'll be just doing the rest tonight as I go. I said before, having these files is a real savior, and it really is, because what it means now is I can go through and start marking off, this bit's done, that bit's done, I've had an issue here, this won't work, or whatever it might be. Having the client's own document, own set of requests to go back to is a real help in these kinds of projects. Yeah. And that, I guess, is audio editing, or at least, how I do it when I've got a decent starting recording. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who has joined us. It's been nice hanging out. It's been fun. I think we'll do more of these in the future. If you've got any suggestions on things you'd like to see in Working Out Loud sessions, let me know. It's they are casual, so we can do them fairly last minute. I'd quite like to do them once a week. I'm thinking maybe next week I'll just do some normal e-learning building. Maybe I don't know. I've got a couple of storyline projects that maybe I could share on here. Yeah. Until then, I shall bid you all a good evening, and see you, if not before, then on Friday for the ID update.